Hidden beyond Kyoto's sacred borders lies Nara, Japan's first imperial capital, a city that whispers with the voices of monks and something else. From the sacred deer of Nara to the cursed forests of Aokigahara, from haunted mansions to shape-shifting entities that defy explanation, Japan holds secrets that have terrified and fascinated for centuries. These are not mere tales told around campfires. These are documented encounters, witnessed phenomena, and mysteries that continue to baffle investigators to this day. Imagine standing at the gates of Kasuga Taisha Shrine in Nara as twilight descends. The ancient stone lanterns begin to flicker with ethereal light, casting dancing shadows between the sacred trees. 3,000 lanterns line these paths, each one placed with reverence and purpose. But among them stands one that the local priests refuse to acknowledge, one that visitors claim whispers names in the darkness, names of those who will soon die. This is where our journey begins, in a city that served as Japan's first permanent capital over 1,300 years ago. Nara holds within its boundaries not just historical treasures, but spiritual mysteries that have endured since the dawn of Japanese civilization. Here, where sacred deer roam freely as messengers of the gods, where the great bronze Buddha sits in eternal meditation, and where ancient Shinto and Buddhist traditions intertwine, something else lurks in the shadows. The Japanese have a word, shinrei, which refers to spirits or souls of the deceased. Unlike the malevolent ghosts of Western tradition, these entities exist in a complex spiritual ecosystem where the living and the dead coexist in delicate balance. But sometimes that balance is disturbed. Sometimes the dead refuse to rest. As we walk these sacred paths tonight, remember that in Japan, the supernatural is not separate from the natural world. It is woven into the very fabric of existence, as real as the cherry blossoms that bloom each spring, as permanent as the mountains that rise toward the heavens. Every temple, every shrine, every ancient forest holds stories that would make the rational mind question what is real and what is merely shadow. But tonight, we will discover that shadows can be very real indeed. Deep within the grounds of Kasuga Taisha, past the main worship halls where thousands of pilgrims come to pray, stands a stone lantern that appears identical to all the others. Carved from the same weathered granite, bearing the same traditional inscriptions, illuminated by the same flickering flame. Yet this particular lantern, known only in whispered conversations among local residents, possesses a terrible secret. The lantern sits along a lesser-used path, one that winds deeper into the sacred forest where the deer gather at dusk. Visitors who have taken this route speak of hearing something impossible. A voice, barely audible above the evening breeze, speaking names, always names. Names of people they know, people they love, people who are very much alive. Kenji Tanaka, a maintenance worker at the shrine for over 20 years, first heard the whispers on a foggy October evening in 2003. He was conducting his usual rounds, checking that all the lanterns were properly lit, when he heard his daughter's name carried on the wind. Yuki, the voice said, clear as daylight despite its ethereal quality. Yuki Tanaka. Kenji dismissed it as his imagination, perhaps fatigue from a long day's work. But 3 days later, his daughter Yuki was killed in a car accident on her way home from university. The intersection where she died was one she had traveled safely hundreds of times before. The other driver, who survived, claimed that his brakes simply failed without warning. Word of Kenji's experience spread quietly through the community. Other shrine workers began to pay attention during their evening rounds. What they discovered chilled them to their bones. The lantern spoke regularly, usually at dusk when the mist rolled in from the mountains. It spoke the names of people from the local community, people known to the listeners. And without exception, within days or weeks of hearing their names, those people died. The deaths were always unexpected, but never obviously supernatural. Heart attacks in seemingly healthy individuals. Accidents that defied explanation. sudden illnesses that progressed with unnatural speed. The medical community could find no connection, no pattern beyond terrible coincidence. But the shrine workers knew better. Dr. Hiroshi Yamamoto, a folklore researcher from Nara University, spent 3 months investigating the phenomenon in 2008. He interviewed dozens of witnesses and documented their accounts with scientific rigor. What he found disturbed him profoundly. "I approached this as a skeptical academic," Dr. Yamamoto explains in his published research. "I expected to find simple explanations. Wing patterns that created auditory illusions, psychological suggestion affecting grief-stricken families, confirmation bias causing people to remember only the accurate predictions while forgetting the false ones. Instead, I found a consistency of testimony that was impossible to dismiss." Dr. Yamamoto's research revealed that the whispers had been reported for decades, possibly centuries. Elderly residents recalled their grandparents speaking of the death lantern in hushed tones. Ancient shrine records, carefully preserved in the temple archives, contained oblique references to spiritual disturbances along that particular path dating back to the Edo period. One record, written by a head priest in 1847, described voices of the beyond that speak the names of those called to the other world. The priest had ordered the lantern removed and replaced, but the new lantern began whispering within a month of its installation. Eventually, the shrine officials gave up trying to silence it and instead warned visitors to avoid that path after dark. But the lantern's curse extends beyond mere prediction of death. Several witnesses report experiencing what they describe as time slips while in its presence. Maintenance worker Hiroshi Sato described an evening in 2015 when he approached the lantern to replace its oil. As he drew near, he heard the whispers begin, but this time they were not speaking names. Instead, they were having a conversation. "I heard 2 voices," Sato recounts, "an old man and a young woman. They were discussing someone's funeral arrangements, talking about flowers and ceremonies. But they were speaking in Old Japanese, using words and phrases I barely understood. It was like listening to people from 100 years ago." As Sato listened, transfixed by the impossible conversation, the mist around the lantern began to thicken. The modern shrine buildings visible through the trees seemed to fade, replaced by older structures he didn't recognize. The electric lighting from the main complex disappeared, leaving only the flickering flames of the stone lanterns to illuminate the night. "I felt like I was stepping backward in time," Sato explains. "The air smelled different, older somehow. I could hear the sound of wooden sandals on stone paths, voices speaking in that ancient dialect. I realized I was witnessing some kind of funeral procession from long ago." Sato watched as shadowy figures moved through the mist, carrying what appeared to be a palanquin draped in white burial cloth. The procession moved with the slow, ceremonial pace of traditional Japanese funeral rites. As it passed near the lantern, the whispers grew louder, and Sato could make out more of the conversation. The old man's voice was explaining the importance of proper burial rites, the necessity of ensuring the deceased spirit could find peace. The woman's voice was younger, sadder, asking questions about the afterlife and whether the dead truly rest. Their words carried the weight of genuine grief, real loss echoing across the centuries. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the vision ended. The mist cleared, the modern shrine buildings reappeared, and Sato found himself alone beside the lantern, which had fallen silent. But the experience left him profoundly shaken, convinced that he had witnessed some kind of spiritual recording, an echo of past events somehow trapped within the stone itself. Paranormal investigators who have studied the lantern theorize that it may be what they call a spiritual nexus, a location where the boundaries between past, present, and future become permeable. The limestone from which it was carved may have come from a quarry with its own tragic history, or the lantern may have been inadvertently placed over a site of significant spiritual activity. Local Shinto priests, while officially denying the lantern's supernatural properties, quietly perform purification rituals along that path every month. They burn sacred incense, sprinkle blessed salt, and recite prayers designed to calm restless spirits. Yet the whispers continue. Father Keisuke Matsuda, who has served at Kasuga Taisha for over 15 years, speaks carefully about the phenomenon. In Shinto tradition, we understand that spirits can become attached to physical objects, especially those made from natural materials like stone or wood. If a spirit has unfinished business or died in a state of great emotional distress, it may seek a way to communicate with the living world. We neither confirm nor deny such phenomena, but we respect the concerns of our community. The most disturbing aspect of the Whispering Lantern may be its apparent accuracy. Of the 43 names documented by Dr. Yamamoto's research, 38 of the named individuals died within 6 months of their names being heard. The remaining 5 moved away from the area shortly after their names were whispered, breaking all contact with local residents. This raises a terrifying question. Does the lantern predict death, or does hearing one's name spoken by it somehow invoke death? Are the whispers a warning of fate, or a curse that seals it? Recent witnesses report that the lantern's activity has increased in recent years. Where it once whispered names perhaps once or twice a month, it now speaks almost nightly during certain seasons. The peak activity occurs during the Obon festival period in August, when Japanese tradition holds that the spirits of the dead return to visit their families. During Obon 2019, shrine worker Miyuki Hashimoto documented an unprecedented event. Instead of single names, the lantern began reciting what sounded like a passenger manifest, dozens of names spoken in rapid succession over the course of nearly an hour. Hashimoto recognized some of the names as local residents, but many were unfamiliar to her. 3 weeks later, a tour bus carrying 41 passengers from the Nara area crashed on a mountain highway. 39 people died in the accident, which investigators attributed to brake failure on a steep descent. When Hashimoto compared her notes to the accident victim list, she discovered that 37 of the names matched exactly. The lantern had apparently foreseen one of the worst traffic accidents in the region's history, speaking the names of the doomed with the same eerie precision it had always displayed. But this mass prediction raised new questions about the nature of its power. How could a spirit, if that's what inhabits the lantern, have knowledge of events yet to occur? Some researchers theorize that the entity within the lantern exists outside normal temporal boundaries, able to perceive past, present, and future as a single continuous moment. Others suggest that it may be connected to a larger spiritual network, receiving information from other supernatural entities throughout Japan. Whatever the explanation, the Whispering Lantern of Kasuga Taisha continues to speak its terrible truths into the night. Visitors to the shrine are no longer officially warned about the phenomenon, but word spreads through whispered conversations and internet forums. Most people avoid that particular path after dark, heeding an ancient instinct that warns against seeking knowledge that mortals were never meant to possess. But for those brave or foolish enough to listen, the lantern waits in the mist-shrouded darkness, ready to speak names that should never be heard by living ears. The deer of Nara are beloved symbols of the ancient capital, protected by law and revered as sacred messengers of the Shinto deity Takame Kazuchi no Mikoto. Over 1,500 of these gentle creatures roam freely through Nara Park and the surrounding forests, bowing to visitors who offer them special deer crackers and posing for countless photographs with delighted tourists. But deep in the mountain forests surrounding the city, where few visitors venture and the ancient trees grow thick with shadow, legends speak of a very different kind of deer. The locals call it Yamada Shika, the 8-branched deer, though most descriptions speak of a creature with 3 distinct heads rather than 8 antler branches. This is no gentle messenger of the gods, but a vengeful spirit that appears to those who violate the sacred forests or show disrespect to the natural world. The earliest recorded sighting of Yamada Shika dates back to 1789, documented in the journal of a Buddhist monk named Shishin, who was traveling between mountain temples. According to his account, he had taken shelter for the night in a forest grove when he witnessed what he initially believed to be 3 deer standing close together in the moonlight. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, Shishin wrote, I perceived that what I had taken for 3 separate creatures was in fact a single being of most unnatural form. From one body arose 3 necks, each bearing the head of a deer, but with eyes that glowed like lanterns in the night. The creature stood motionless, as if aware of my presence, and I felt upon my soul a weight of judgment that nearly crushed my spirit. Jishin claimed that the creature's 3 heads each bore different expressions, one sorrowful, one angry, and one completely emotionless. As he watched in terror, the being began to speak, though its words came not from any of the 3 mouths, but seemed to emanate from the forest itself. The spirit spoke of the balance that must be maintained between human civilization and the natural world, Shishin recorded. It showed me visions of the future, of forests cleared for farmland, of sacred groves destroyed for profit, of the deer and other creatures driven from their ancestral homes. It warned that those who break this balance would face consequences beyond their understanding. Modern sightings of Yamada Shika began appearing in the 1960s, coinciding with rapid development and industrialization in the area surrounding Nara. The first contemporary account came from construction foreman Takeshi Ogawa, who was overseeing the clearing of forest land for a new housing development in 1967. Ogawa reported that work had proceeded normally for several weeks, until his crew began finding dead animals arranged in peculiar patterns around their equipment. Deer, rabbits, and birds were discovered placed in perfect circles, their bodies unmarked, but somehow drained of all color, as if the life force had been drawn out of them. At first, we thought it was some kind of disease, Ogawa explains in a 1995 interview with Nara television. But the veterinarians could find nothing wrong with the animals. They appeared to have died of natural causes, but the arrangement of the bodies was clearly deliberate. Someone or something was sending us a message. The message became clearer when workers began experiencing equipment failures and accidents. Chainsaws would now function without warning, cutting through their safety cables. Bulldozers would lose hydraulic pressure at critical moments, nearly crushing their operators. 3 workers were hospitalized with mysterious illnesses that caused temporary blindness and severe disorientation. On the evening of October 15, 1967, Ogawa decided to work late, hoping to catch whoever or whatever was sabotaging his construction site. As darkness fell over the partially cleared forest, he took position behind a large oak tree that was scheduled for removal the following day. What he witnessed that night would haunt him for the rest of his life. I saw it emerge from the tree line around midnight, Ogawa recounts. At first, I thought it was just a regular deer, maybe coming to investigate the construction site. But as it moved into the moonlight, I could see that something was terribly wrong. The creature that stepped into the clearing defied all natural law. Standing nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, it possessed the basic body structure of a deer, but with proportions that seemed stretched and distorted. Most unnaturally, from its shoulders rose not 1 neck, but 3, each supporting a fully formed deer head with its own set of antlers. The heads moved independently, Ogawa describes. The left head was looking around the construction site, examining our equipment. The center head was staring directly at me, though I was well hidden behind the tree. The right head was tilted skyward, as if listening to sounds I couldn't hear. As Ogawa watched, paralyzed by fear and fascination, the creature began to move through the construction site with purpose. It approached each piece of heavy machinery and appeared to breathe on it, though no visible breath emerged from any of the 3 mouths. Wherever the creature's attention focused, the metal began to corrode with impossible speed, developing rust and structural weakness that would cause dangerous failures. I watched it destroy months of work in minutes, Ogawa explains. not through violence or force, but through some kind of accelerated entropy. It was making our machines age decades in seconds. But the most terrifying moment came when the creature finished its circuit of the construction site and turned all three heads toward Ogawa's hiding place. Despite the darkness and his careful concealment, it had known exactly where he was from the beginning. The three heads began to speak in unison, their voices creating an eerie harmony that seemed to resonate through Ogawa's bones. They spoke in classical Japanese, using words and grammatical structures from centuries past, but their meaning was unmistakably clear. "The forest remembers every tree that falls," the creature intoned. "Every creature displaced, every sacred grove destroyed. You have awakened something that has slept for generations, something that will not rest until the balance is restored." As the creature spoke, Ogawa began to experience vivid hallucinations or visions. He saw the forest as it had existed centuries before human settlement, vast, pristine, filled with wildlife in perfect harmony. He witnessed the gradual encroachment of civilization, the systematic destruction of ancient ecosystems, the displacement of countless species. But most disturbing were the visions of the future the creature showed him. He saw the housing development completed, but the houses stood empty and crumbling, their foundations undermined by some invisible force. He watched families move in only to flee within weeks, driven away by unexplained phenomena. Strange sounds in the night, electrical systems that failed without cause, children who claimed to see glowing eyes watching them from the windows. "It showed me that nothing built on land taken through disrespect would ever prosper," Ogawa explains. The houses would be plagued by problems that no amount of maintenance could fix. The residents would never find peace or happiness there. When the visions ended, Ogawa found himself alone in the construction site. The three-headed deer had vanished, but the evidence of its presence remained. Every piece of machinery showed signs of advanced corrosion. The metal components that should have lasted for years were now brittle and unsafe. Ogawa attempted to continue the project, replacing the damaged equipment and hiring additional workers. But the accidents and equipment failures continued with such frequency that his insurance company threatened to cancel his coverage. Workers began quitting, spreading stories about the cursed construction site throughout the region. The final straw came when Ogawa's own son, who had been helping with the project, suffered a severe accident when a hydraulic lift failed without warning. The young man survived, but was permanently disabled, his spine damaged in the fall. That night, my son told me he had seen the three-headed deer standing beside the lift just before it collapsed, Ogawa reveals. It hadn't touched anything, just watched with those terrible glowing eyes. He said all three heads had looked sad, as if they regretted what was about to happen, but couldn't prevent it. Within a month, Ogawa abandoned the construction project entirely, selling the land at a significant loss to a conservation group that converted it back to protected forest. The equipment he salvaged from the site continued to malfunction until it was completely scrapped, as if the creature's curse had permanently tainted anything associated with the project. Since Ogawa's encounter, sightings of Yamata Shika have been reported throughout the region, always in connection with development projects that threaten natural habitats. In 1983, a logging crew working in the mountains above Nara reported seeing the creature observing their operations from ridge lines. Within days, several loggers were injured when trees fell in unexpected directions, defying the laws of physics and their years of experience. The pattern has repeated dozens of times over the decades. Construction workers, developers, and anyone involved in large-scale environmental destruction report encounters with the three-headed deer spirit. The creature never attacks directly, but its presence seems to invoke a series of coincidences and equipment failures that make continued work impossible. Environmental researcher Dr. Akiko Taniguchi has studied the Yamata Shika phenomenon for over 20 years, collecting testimonies from witnesses and documenting the economic impact of the creature's alleged interventions. Her research suggests that projects abandoned due to three-headed deer encounters have preserved over 10,000 acres of forest that would otherwise have been developed. Whether one believes in the supernatural aspects or not, Dr. Taniguchi observes, the legend of Yamashika has become a powerful force for environmental conservation. Construction companies now think twice before bidding on projects that involve clearing old-growth forest, knowing that their workers may refuse to continue if they hear stories about the three-headed deer. The creature's influence extends beyond simple fear. Several former construction workers who encountered Yamashika report experiencing profound changes in their worldview, becoming environmental activists or changing careers entirely to work in conservation. Hiroshi Nakamura, a heavy equipment operator who claims to have seen the creature in 1995, now works as a forest ranger in the mountains surrounding Nara. He describes his encounter as a spiritual awakening that changed the entire course of his life. When I looked into those 6 eyes, 2 on each head, I felt like I was seeing the accumulated wisdom of every animal that had ever lived in that forest, Nakamura explains. I understood that we humans are not separate from nature, not superior to it. We are part of an interconnected web of life, and when we damage that web, we damage ourselves. The most recent major sighting of Yamashika occurred in 2018, when a construction crew preparing to build a shopping center reported multiple encounters with the creature over a period of 2 weeks. Unlike previous sightings, this time the creature appeared during daylight hours, visible to dozens of witnesses simultaneously. Project manager Kazuki Yamada documented the events in a detailed report that was later leaked to environmental groups and paranormal researchers. According to Yamada's account, the three-headed deer first appeared on the construction site's perimeter on a Tuesday morning, standing motionless among the trees, while workers went about their usual tasks. It made no attempt to hide, Yamada wrote. It simply stood there, watching us work, as if it was conducting some kind of inspection. The workers noticed it immediately, and several refused to continue working while it was visible. Over the following days, the creature's appearances became more frequent and more intrusive. It would emerge from the forest to walk through the construction site during lunch breaks, examining equipment and materials with apparent intelligence. Workers reported that it seemed particularly interested in plans and blueprints, approaching close enough to examine documents spread on work tables. The strangest thing was how the normal deer began to behave, Yamada noted. The sacred deer from Nara Park started appearing at the construction site, something they had never done before. They would stand in groups around the perimeter, as if they were waiting for something. Local wildlife officials said they had never seen behavior like it. The situation reached a crisis point when the three-headed deer began appearing inside the construction site's security perimeter, somehow bypassing locked gates and motion sensors without triggering alarms. Security cameras captured footage of the creature moving through the site at night, but the video quality was poor, showing only a large, indistinct shape with multiple points of light that could have been glowing eyes. On the final night before construction was abandoned, security guard Kenji Morimoto reported a confrontation that convinced the construction company to halt the project permanently. I was making my midnight rounds when I found all 3 heads waiting for me in the center of the site, Morimoto recounts. They were arranged in a triangle around the spot where the foundation was supposed to be poured the next morning. Each head was facing a different direction, but I could feel all 6 eyes watching me. As Morimoto approached, his flashlight beam seemed to be absorbed by the creature's form, creating an area of deeper darkness rather than illumination. The 3 heads began to speak in their characteristic unison, but this time their message was different from previous encounters. They told me they had been patient for too long, Morimoto explains. They said the time for warnings had passed, and if construction continued, the consequences would extend far beyond equipment failures and accidents. They spoke of awakening other spirits, older and more dangerous than themselves. The creature showed Morimoto visions of what would happen if the shopping center was completed. He saw the building plagued by inexplicable phenomena, merchandise that would rot overnight, electrical systems that would fail constantly, customers who would flee in terror from something they couldn't identify. But more disturbing were the visions of the shopping center becoming a focal point for supernatural activity throughout the region. The creature suggested that forcing it to take more drastic action would weaken the barriers that keep other, more malevolent spirits contained. It showed me things that would happen not just to the shopping center, but to the entire city of Nara, Morimoto reveals. Ancient curses reawakening, restless spirits emerging from centuries of slumber, the careful balance between the physical and spiritual worlds collapsing entirely. When the visions ended, Morimoto found himself alone in a construction site, but the ground where the creature had stood was marked with 3 perfectly circular patches where no grass would ever grow again. These barren circles remain visible today, nearly 6 years later, despite repeated attempts to reseed the area. The construction company abandoned the project the following morning, citing unforeseen environmental complications. The land was eventually sold to the Nara prefecture government and converted into a nature preserve, ensuring that the ancient forest would remain undisturbed. Wildlife biologists studying the preserve have noted unusual behavior among the deer population in the area. The animals seem unusually intelligent and organized, moving in coordinated groups and displaying problem-solving abilities that exceed normal deer behavior. Some researchers theorize that the presence of Yamada Shika may have somehow enhanced the cognitive abilities of the entire local deer population. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the 3-headed deer phenomenon is its apparent connection to environmental protection efforts throughout Japan. Similar creatures have been reported in other regions facing development pressure, always in connection with projects that threaten old-growth forests or sacred natural sites. Environmental activists have begun to see Yamada Shika not as a monster to be feared, but as a guardian spirit protecting Japan's natural heritage. Some groups have adopted the 3-headed deer as an unofficial symbol, using its image on protest signs and conservation literature. Whether viewed as supernatural guardian or powerful psychological symbol, Yamada Shika has become an integral part of modern Japanese environmental consciousness. Its legend continues to evolve, adapting to new threats while maintaining its core message about the importance of respecting the natural world. In the sacred forests of Nara, where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds has always been thin, the 3-headed deer continues its eternal vigil, watching, waiting, and ready to defend the ancient groves against any who would disturb the delicate balance between civilization and wilderness. For those who venture deep into these forests, especially those with intentions that might disturb the natural order, the glowing eyes of Yamada Shika may be watching from the shadows, ready to remind humanity that some things are more sacred than progress. Rising 442 meters above the city of Nara, Mount Wakakusa presents a deceptively peaceful appearance. Its gentle slopes are covered in grass that turns golden in autumn and emerald in spring, creating a pastoral scene that has inspired poets for over 1,000 years. But this serene mountain holds within its slopes a dark secret, a tale of betrayal, murder, and supernatural vengeance that continues to unfold to this day. Every January, during the annual Wakakusa Yamayaki Festival, the entire mountain is set ablaze in a controlled burn that has been performed for centuries. Thousands of spectators gather to watch the dramatic spectacle as fire races up the mountainside, illuminating the night sky with an orange glow, visible throughout the Nara Basin. The festival is said to commemorate an ancient boundary dispute between 2 Buddhist temples, but local folklore suggests a far more sinister origin. The true history of the burning mountain begins in 1467, during the turbulent Onin War period, when Buddhist temples maintained their own armies and political conflicts often turned violent. At that time, a small monastery called Jizen-ji stood near the summit of Mount Wakakusa, home to a community of monks devoted to esoteric Buddhist practices. The abbot of Jisenji was a man named Kenjiro, renowned throughout the region for his spiritual powers and his ability to communicate with the spirit world. Under his leadership, the monastery had gained considerable influence and wealth, attracting pilgrims from across Japan who sought his guidance in spiritual matters. But Kenjiro's success bred jealousy among rival religious leaders, particularly Abbot Shinran of the powerful Kofukuji Temple in the valley below. Historical records from the period, preserved in the Nara Prefecture archives, document a series of disputes between the two religious communities over land rights, taxation, and spiritual authority. The conflict came to a head in the winter of 1467, when accusations of heretical practices were leveled against Kenjiro and his followers. These charges, almost certainly fabricated by political enemies, claimed that the monks of Jisenji were practicing forbidden rituals involving necromancy and spirit summoning. In medieval Japan, accusations of heretical Buddhist practices were taken extremely seriously by both religious and secular authorities. The penalty for confirmed heresy was death by burning, a punishment designed not only to eliminate the heretics, but to purify the spiritual contamination they were believed to have caused. On the night of January 15, 1468, a combined force of warrior monks from Kofukuji and samurai loyal to the local military governor surrounded Jisenji Monastery. The attack came without warning, trapping the 12 monks inside their wooden temple buildings as the structures were set ablaze from all sides. Contemporary accounts, recorded in the diary of a merchant who witnessed the attack from the valley below, describe a horrific scene of deliberate murder disguised as religious purification. The attacking forces had blocked all exits from the monastery, ensuring that none of the accused heretics could escape the flames. But Abbot Kenjiro did not die quietly. As the fires consumed the monastery around him, witnesses reported hearing his voice rising above the roar of the flames, reciting not prayers for salvation, but curses upon those who had betrayed him. His final words, preserved in multiple historical sources, were a vow that neither he nor his followers would find peace until justice had been served. By fire we die, and by fire we shall return, Kenjiro reportedly declared as the monastery collapsed around him. Those who have shed innocent blood in the name of righteousness shall know no rest until the truth is revealed and the guilty are punished. The burning of Jisenji Monastery was officially recorded as a necessary action against dangerous heretics. But privately, many of those involved began to experience disturbing phenomena almost immediately. Within a month of the attack, 3 of the warrior monks who had participated in the raid died under mysterious circumstances. The first, a young monk named Bagen, was found burned to death in his sleeping quarters at Kofukuji Temple, despite the fact that he was discovered in the center of a stone room with no possible source of ignition. His body showed signs of having been consumed by intense flames. The wooden sleeping mat beside him was untouched by fire. The second victim, a samurai named Yoshimun, died when his horse threw him into a cooking fire during a winter feast. Witnesses reported that the normally docile animal had suddenly reared up without provocation, as if startled by something invisible. Yoshimun's death was particularly gruesome, as his armor trapped him in the flames long enough to cause fatal burns. The third death occurred during a religious ceremony at Kofukuji Temple. Monk Shinkai, who had helped plan the attack on Jisenji, spontaneously combusted while reciting evening prayers. Fellow monks reported that he had suddenly begun screaming about seeing eyes in the flames before his robes caught fire despite being nowhere near any open flame. These deaths might have been dismissed as terrible coincidences, but they were accompanied by supernatural phenomena that terrified the religious community. Monks at Kofukuji reported seeing a tall figure in burned robes walking the temple grounds at night, leaving behind the smell of smoke and charred wood. The apparition, which witnesses described as unmistakably Abbot Kenjiro despite his horrific burns, would appear most often in the temple's main hall during evening prayers. He would stand silently at the back of the congregation, his burned face clearly visible in the lamplight, watching the ceremonies with eyes that glowed like embers. Father Mayon, who served as head priest at Kofukuji during this period, documented these encounters in his private journal, which was discovered in the temple archives in 1923. His entries describe a progressive escalation of supernatural activity that culminated in a direct confrontation with the vengeful spirit. A burned monk appears nightly now, Mayon wrote in February 1468. He stands among us during prayers as if he were still alive, but his presence brings such cold that frost forms on the temple walls, even in this mild winter. The other monks have begun to avoid evening services, claiming they can hear the voices of all 12 burned monks chanting in harmony with our prayers. The situation became untenable when the apparition began to interact directly with the living. During a ceremony commemorating the Buddha's enlightenment, witnesses reported that Kenjiro's spirit approached Abbot Shinran directly, pointing an accusatory finger at the man who had orchestrated his death. "You know the truth," the spirit reportedly said, its voice carrying the sound of crackling flames. "You know we were innocent of the charges you brought against us. Yet you chose political advantage over spiritual truth, and innocent blood stains your hands." Shinran, according to multiple witness accounts, appeared to age decades in moments during this confrontation. His hair turned white, his face became deeply lined, and he began to tremble uncontrollably as the weight of his guilt manifested physically. Within hours of this encounter, Shinran suffered what modern medicine would recognize as a massive stroke, leaving him paralyzed and unable to speak. He lingered for 3 months, during which time he could only communicate by writing with his left hand. His final written message, preserved in the temple archives, was a full confession of his role in fabricating the heresy charges against Jisenji Monastery. "We killed innocent men for political gain," Shinran wrote in shaky characters. "The burned monk speaks truth. May Buddha forgive what we have done, for I fear the dead will not." Shinran's death did not end the supernatural persecution of those involved in the massacre. Over the following years, all 37 men who had participated in the attack on Jisenji died under circumstances involving fire. Some burned to death in their homes, despite stone construction and careful fire prevention. Others died in accidents involving cooking fires, forge flames, or even lightning strikes on clear days. But the most disturbing aspect of these deaths was the consistent report from witnesses that the victims had been seen speaking to invisible companions in the hours before their deaths. They would be found having animated conversations with empty air, sometimes pleading for forgiveness, sometimes arguing angrily with accusations only they could hear. The supernatural activity surrounding the massacre began to focus on Mount Wakakusa itself as the years passed. Local residents reported seeing lights moving on the mountainside at night, flames that flickered among the grass without consuming it. These phantom fires would appear in patterns that suggested the outline of buildings, as if the burned monastery was being rebuilt nightly from ethereal flames. During the late 15th century, several attempts were made to construct new religious buildings on the site of the destroyed monastery. Each effort failed when the construction materials would spontaneously combust, often while workers watched helplessly. The workers themselves reported feeling watched by invisible presences and hearing the sound of chanting carried on the wind. The phenomenon that would become known as the Black Monk of Mount Wakakusa first gained widespread recognition in 1573, over a century after the original massacre. A group of pilgrims climbing the mountain to view the sunrise reported encountering a tall figure in burned Buddhist robes standing near the summit. He appeared as a man who had walked through fire and somehow survived, wrote pilgrim leader Juntara Miyake in a letter to his family. His robes were blackened and still smoking. His skin showed the terrible scars of burning, yet he moved with purpose and intelligence. When he spoke to us, his voice carried the sound of wind through ashes. The burned monk, identified by the pilgrims as Abbot Kenjiro, through his distinctive facial features despite the fire damage, delivered a message that would be repeated in encounters for centuries to come. He explained that he and his 11 followers remained bound to the mountain, unable to find peace until the truth of their innocence was acknowledged and their unjust deaths were properly commemorated. We were murdered for the crime of seeking deeper spiritual understanding, the apparition told the pilgrims. Our research into the nature of death and the spirit world was branded as heresy by those who feared knowledge they could not control. Until this injustice is recognized, we remain trapped between worlds, neither fully dead nor truly alive. The burned monk's appearances became more frequent during the Edo period, particularly around the anniversary of the monastery's destruction. Local officials, seeking to reduce supernatural disturbances and public unrest, instituted the annual burning of Mount Wakakusa as a form of memorial service for the murdered monks. The first official Wakakusa Yamayaki festival was held in 1760, combining Shinto purification rituals with Buddhist memorial prayers. The controlled burning of the mountain was intended to provide the murdered monks with a symbolic recreation of their death, allowing their spirits to experience the flames without the terror and injustice of their original burning. Initially, the festival seemed to reduce supernatural activity on the mountain. The phantom lights appeared less frequently, and encounters with the burned monk became rare. But rather than disappearing entirely, the phenomena evolved, becoming more complex and purposeful. Modern sightings of the Black Monk began in the early 20th century, coinciding with Japan's rapid modernization and the decline of traditional Buddhist practices. The spirit seemed to adapt to changing times, appearing not just to religious pilgrims, but to hikers, photographers, and even tourists visiting the mountain for recreational purposes. The first documented 20th century encounter occurred in 1923, when photographer Kenji Asano was capturing images of the annual grass-burning festival. As he positioned his camera to photograph the spreading flames, he noticed a figure standing motionless within the fire itself, apparently unaffected by the intense heat. I thought at first it was an optical illusion, perhaps a shadow cast by the smoke, Asano wrote in his published account. But as I focused my camera lens, I could see clearly that it was a man in traditional Buddhist robes, standing calmly in the center of flames that should have incinerated him instantly. Asano managed to capture several photographs before the figure vanished, but when he developed the film, the images showed only empty flames. However, careful examination of the photographs revealed subtle anomalies, shadows that fell in impossible directions, areas of flame that seemed to bend around an invisible presence, and what appeared to be footprints in the ash where no living person had walked. The failure of photography to capture the Black Monk became a consistent pattern in subsequent encounters. Despite numerous attempts by both amateur and professional photographers, no clear image of the spirit has ever been successfully recorded. Cameras malfunction, film becomes mysteriously exposed, or digital equipment experiences unexplained data corruption when pointed at the apparition. This photographic immunity has led some researchers to theorize that the Black Monk exists in a different optical spectrum than normal matter, perhaps as a manifestation of residual thermal energy from the original fire that killed him. Others suggest that the spirit actively interferes with recording devices, preferring to communicate directly with living witnesses rather than leave evidence that could be analyzed scientifically. Dr. Yoshiko Sato, a paranormal researcher from Tokyo University who has studied the Mount Wakakusa phenomena for over 30 years, has collected detailed testimonies from more than 200 witnesses who claim to have encountered the Black Monk. Her research reveals consistent patterns in these sightings that suggest the spirit operates according to specific rules and motivations. The Black Monk appears most frequently to individuals who are experiencing some form of injustice or persecution. Dr. Sato explains in her published research. He seems drawn to people who are facing false accusations, political oppression, or situations where the truth is being suppressed for someone else's gain. This pattern became particularly evident during World War II, when the black monk was reported appearing to Japanese citizens who were being persecuted for anti-war sentiments or suspected disloyalty to the military government. In several documented cases, individuals who had been marked for arrest by the secret police reported receiving warnings from the burned monk, allowing them to escape persecution. One of the most detailed wartime accounts comes from Hiroshi Tanaka, a professor at Nara University who was under surveillance by military authorities for his suspected pacifist views. In 1943, while hiking on Mount Wakakusa to clear his thoughts, Tanaka encountered the black monk near the site of the former monastery. He appeared without warning, stepping out from behind a stand of pine trees as if he had been waiting for me. Tanaka recalled in a 1975 interview. Despite his burned appearance, there was something deeply compassionate about his presence. I felt no fear, only a sense of recognition, as if I were meeting someone who understood my situation completely. The black monk spoke to Tanaka about the nature of persecution and the importance of maintaining one's principles despite external pressure. He shared details about his own experience of being falsely accused and murdered for his beliefs, drawing parallels to the political climate of wartime Japan. He told me that throughout history, those in power have always feared knowledge and truth, Tanaka recounted. He warned me that I was being watched and advised me to be more careful about expressing my views publicly. Without his warning, I almost certainly would have been arrested and probably executed. Following the monk's advice, Tanaka became more circumspect in his public statements while continuing his academic work in private. He survived the war and went on to become one of Japan's leading historians, specializing in the study of religious persecution throughout Japanese history. The black monk's appearances during the post-war period often involved encounters with individuals struggling with guilt over their actions during the conflict. Veterans who had participated in war crimes, civilians who had collaborated with military authorities, and officials who had enforced oppressive policies reported being visited by the burned spirit. Unlike the vengeful apparitions of popular ghost stories, however, the black monk seemed more interested in promoting understanding and redemption than in punishing the guilty. Witnesses consistently reported that their encounters with the spirit led to profound personal transformation and a commitment to seeking truth and justice. Retired soldier Keisuke Yamamoto, who had served in China during the war, described a 1955 encounter with the black monk that changed his entire worldview. Yamamoto had been struggling with guilt over his participation in military actions that resulted in civilian deaths, and had come to Mount Wakakusa contemplating suicide. I was sitting on the summit, watching the sun set over Nara, when he appeared beside me, Yamamoto recalled. His burned face showed infinite sadness, but also infinite understanding. He didn't judge me for what I had done, but helped me understand that carrying guilt without taking action to make amends was itself a form of injustice. The black monk spoke to Yamamoto about the difference between guilt and responsibility, explaining that true redemption came not from self-punishment, but from using one's experiences to prevent similar injustices from occurring. Following this encounter, Yamamoto dedicated the rest of his life to peace activism and education about the true costs of war. As Japan entered the modern era, encounters with the black monk began to reflect contemporary social issues. During the student protest movements of the 1960s, several activists reported receiving guidance from the burned spirit about the importance of peaceful resistance and the dangers of allowing righteous anger to corrupt noble goals. Environmental activists in the 1970s and 1980s frequently reported black monk sightings, particularly those involved in protesting industrial development that threatened natural areas around Nara. The spirit seemed to understand that environmental destruction represented a form of injustice against future generations, and offered support to those fighting to preserve Japan's natural heritage. One of the most significant modern encounters occurred in 1995, when a group of lawyers working on behalf of victims of industrial pollution reported a collective sighting during a legal strategy meeting held on Mount Wakakusa. The lawyers were preparing for a major lawsuit against a chemical company that had contaminated groundwater in several communities. Attorney Masako Ishii, who led the legal team, described how the black monk appeared during their outdoor meeting, standing silently among the group as they discussed their case strategy. Rather than interrupting their work, the spirit seemed to be listening intently to their plans. His presence gave us a sense of historical perspective on our struggle, Ishii explained in later interviews. We realized that what we were fighting was not just corporate negligence, but a pattern of powerful interests suppressing truth to protect their profits. It was the same injustice that had killed him centuries earlier. Following the black monk's appearance, the legal team discovered crucial evidence that had been hidden by the chemical company, evidence that ultimately led to a successful lawsuit and compensation for the pollution victims. Several team members reported experiencing unusually vivid dreams in the days following the encounter, dreams that provided insights into where to look for additional evidence. The most recent wave of black monk sightings began in 2011, following the Fukushima nuclear disaster. The spirit has appeared to numerous individuals involved in investigating the accident, whistleblowers trying to expose government and corporate cover-ups, and activists working to protect communities from radiation exposure. These modern encounters suggest that the black monk's mission has evolved beyond seeking justice for his own murder to serving as a guardian spirit for all those who suffer persecution for seeking or speaking truth. His appearances seem to provide both practical guidance and spiritual strength to individuals facing powerful opponents who would suppress inconvenient facts. Nuclear engineer Akira Matsumoto, who became a whistleblower about safety violations at nuclear facilities, reported multiple encounters with the black monk during his legal battles with former employers. In each case, the spirit provided specific advice about how to protect himself legally while continuing to expose dangerous practices. He understands what it means to be targeted for inconvenient knowledge, Matsumoto explains. His guidance helped me navigate the legal system while staying true to my obligation to public safety. Without his counsel, I might have been silenced or discredited. The annual Wakakusa Yamayaki Festival continues to this day, drawing thousands of spectators who come to witness the dramatic burning of the mountain. While most attendees view it as a colorful traditional ceremony, those familiar with the true history understand that they are witnessing a memorial service for murdered monks whose spirits continue to influence Japanese society. During the 2020 festival, held under restricted conditions due to the COVID-19 pandemic, several witnesses reported unusual activity. The controlled flames seemed to form patterns reminiscent of architectural structures, as if the ghostly monastery was being rebuilt from fire. At the climax of the burning, multiple observers reported seeing not one, but 12 figures standing within the flames, suggesting that all the murdered monks were present for the ceremony. Local Buddhist priests who oversee the spiritual aspects of the festival acknowledge the supernatural dimensions of the event, while maintaining official silence about specific phenomena. They perform elaborate purification rituals before and after the burning, designed to honor the dead while maintaining the boundary between the physical and spirit worlds. Father Kasei Watanabe, who has served as head priest for the festival ceremonies for over 20 years, speaks carefully about the ongoing spiritual significance of the event. The annual burning serves multiple purposes, he explains. It maintains the grassland ecosystem, provides a spectacular cultural celebration, and ensures that the spirits of those who died unjustly continue to find peace through proper commemoration. Contemporary witnesses of black monk encounters report that the spirit's message remains consistent across decades and changing social contexts. He continues to advocate for truth over convenience, justice over political expediency, and the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. The burned monk's influence extends beyond individual encounters to affect broader social movements and institutional changes. Legal reforms, environmental protection measures, and transparency initiatives in Japan can often be traced back to individuals who were inspired or guided by their encounters with the spirit. Some researchers theorize that the black monk represents a form of collective conscience, a manifestation of Japan's historical struggle with the tension between social harmony and individual truth-telling. His continuing presence serves as a reminder that some injustices leave spiritual wounds that cannot be healed simply by the passage of time. Whether viewed as supernatural entity or powerful psychological symbol, the Black Monk of Mount Wakakusa continues to play an active role in contemporary Japanese society. His message, born from the flames of religious persecution 5 centuries ago, remains relevant to anyone facing the choice between comfortable silence and dangerous truth. As night falls over Mount Wakakusa and the lights of Nara twinkle in the valley below, the burned monk continues his eternal vigil, standing among the grass where his monastery once flourished, watching over a city that has grown far beyond anything he could have imagined in his mortal life. He remains ready to offer guidance to any who face the same choice between justice and expedience that cost him and his followers their lives. For those who climb the mountain seeking more than just scenic views or cultural experiences, the black monk waits in the darkness, his burned robes smoking gently in the night breeze, his eyes glowing like embers from the fire that killed him but could not silence his voice. He stands as eternal proof that some truths are too important to die, some injustices too profound to be forgotten, and some spirits too determined to be laid to rest by anything less than the full acknowledgement of their sacrifice. Behind the massive bronze Buddha of Todai-ji temple, past the crowds of tourists and pilgrims who come to marvel at one of Japan's most famous cultural treasures, lies a narrow path that most visitors never notice. Partially hidden by ancient cedars and marked only by a small weathered stone marker bearing faded Sanskrit characters, this trail appears to lead nowhere in particular, just another maintenance path winding through the temple's extensive grounds. But those familiar with Todai-ji's darker legends know better than to dismiss this seemingly insignificant walkway. Local temple workers call it Maoi Michi, the path of confusion, and they have learned through hard experience never to follow it alone, especially as daylight fades and shadows begin to lengthen between the trees. The path's supernatural reputation dates back over 8 centuries to the Kamakura period, when Todai-ji was being rebuilt after its destruction during the Genpei War. Construction records from that era, preserved in the temple's extensive archives, contain disturbing references to workers who vanished while exploring the grounds after dark. The first documented disappearance occurred in 1195 when a master carpenter named Jiro Takeda failed to return from an evening inspection of construction materials stored in the forest behind the Great Buddha Hall. Takeda was known for his meticulous attention to detail and had never missed a day of work during the 3 years he had been employed on the reconstruction project. According to the testimony of his assistant, who had accompanied him partway before returning to camp for the evening meal, Takeda had planned to check on timber supplies cached along various forest paths. The assistant reported that his master had been in good spirits and had given no indication of any intention other than completing his routine inspection. When Takeda failed to appear for the morning work assembly, search parties were organized to comb the temple grounds and surrounding forest. What they discovered puzzled and disturbed even the most experienced woodsmen among the construction crew. Takeda's footprints were clearly visible in the soft earth of the forest path, leading from the main temple complex toward the supply caches. But approximately 200 meters from the Great Buddha Hall, at a point where the path curved around a particularly large cedar tree, the footprints simply vanished. It was as if he had been lifted from the earth by invisible hands, reported search party leader Kenji Morimoto in his official statement. His tracks ended at the base of the Great Cedar, but there were no signs of struggle, No disturbed vegetation, no indication that he had climbed the tree or left the path in any direction. More disturbing still, Takeda's footprints showed no sign of hesitation or change in pace as they approached the point of disappearance. He had been walking with his usual steady gait right up until the moment he vanished from the physical world entirely. The search continued for 6 days, expanding to cover the entire mountainside and involving over 100 volunteers from the local community. Buddhist monks from Todai-ji performed purification rituals and consulted ancient texts for guidance on spiritual phenomena that might explain the disappearance. On the 7th day, as the search was about to be officially abandoned, Takeda reappeared as mysteriously as he had vanished. Workers arriving for the morning shift found him sitting calmly beside the Great Buddha Hall, apparently unharmed, but with no memory of the previous week. "I remember beginning my evening inspection," Takeda told the temple officials, who questioned him extensively about his experience. "I recall walking along the forest path, thinking about the timber inventory and planning the next day's work. The next thing I knew, I was sitting here at dawn, watching the sun rise over the Buddha's shoulder." Medical examination revealed no signs of injury or malnutrition, despite Takeda's claim to have no memory of eating or drinking during his week-long absence. His clothes were clean and unwrinkled, his tools were still properly maintained, and he showed no effects of exposure to the elements. Most puzzling of all, Takeda insisted that he had experienced no passage of time between beginning his walk and finding himself at the temple at dawn. From his perspective, he had been gone for perhaps an hour, long enough to walk to the forest and back again. Temple officials documented the incident carefully, but decided to treat it as an isolated mystery rather than a cause for alarm. Construction work continued normally, and Takeda resumed his duties without apparent ill effects. However, they instituted a new policy requiring all workers to travel in pairs when conducting business away from the main construction sites. This precaution proved insufficient when 3 months later, 2 more workers vanished under similar circumstances. Stonemasons Ichiro Sato and his apprentice Koji Nakamura had been sent to retrieve tools left at a worksite deeper in the forest. Like Takeda before them, they vanished at the same curved section of path, their footprints ending abruptly with no sign of struggle or deviation. The pattern established by these early disappearances would repeat with disturbing consistency over the centuries. Workers, pilgrims, and later tourists would venture onto the forest path behind Todai-ji and simply cease to exist at the curve marked by the ancient cedar tree. Some would reappear after varying periods of time with no memory of their absence, while others would never return at all. Systematic documentation of the phenomenon began in 1868, when the Meiji government established modern record-keeping procedures for religious institutions. Temple administrators created a special registry for temporal displacement incidents, as they euphemistically termed the disappearances. The registry, which remains classified and is stored in a secure vault beneath Todai-ji's main administrative building, contains detailed records of over 300 documented cases spanning more than 7 centuries. Analysis of these records reveals patterns that suggest the path operates according to consistent but incomprehensible rules. Dr. Hiroaki Fujiwara, a physicist from Kyoto University who was granted access to the registry in 1987 for a confidential government study, discovered several disturbing correlations in the disappearance data. His classified report, leaked to paranormal researchers in 2003, provides the most comprehensive scientific analysis of the vanishing path phenomenon ever conducted. The disappearances show clear temporal patterns, Dr. Fujiwara wrote in his report. Peak activity occurs during the hours immediately before and after sunset, with secondary peaks at dawn and midnight. The phenomenon is most active during the new moon phase and shows increased frequency during the spring and autumn equinoxes. More unsettling are Dr. Fujiwara's findings regarding the fate of those who vanish. Of the 307 documented cases, 143 individuals eventually returned, usually appearing in the same location where they had disappeared. The remaining 164 were never seen again. Those who returned exhibited consistent symptoms: complete amnesia regarding their absence, no physical signs of aging or deterioration, despite absences ranging from hours to several years, and frequent reports of vivid dreams involving unfamiliar landscapes and encounters with people from different historical periods. Dr. Fujiwara, as interviews with returned individuals, revealed that many had experienced what appeared to be glimpses of past or future versions of the temple grounds. They described seeing Todai-ji in various states of construction and destruction, populated by people wearing clothing from different historical eras. Kenji Yamamoto, who vanished for 3 days in 1982, provided one of the most detailed accounts of the experience. A maintenance worker familiar with every inch of the temple grounds, Yamamoto had been checking for storm damage after a typhoon when he disappeared at the familiar curve in the path. "I remember the moment when everything changed," Yamamoto recounted during extensive interviews with Dr. Fujiwara's research team. "I was walking along the path, stepping over some fallen branches, when suddenly the forest around me looked different. The trees were in the same places, but they seemed younger and smaller. The path itself looked older, more worn." As Yamamoto continued walking, he encountered other people on the path, construction workers wearing period clothing and using tools from centuries past. They seemed unaware of his presence, going about their tasks as if he were invisible or didn't exist in their time frame. "I saw the Great Buddha Hall under construction," Yamamoto reported. "Not the modern reconstruction, but the original building from over 1,000 years ago. I watched workers using techniques and tools that hadn't been employed for centuries, moving massive timbers with a precision that seemed impossible given their primitive equipment." Most disturbing was Yamamoto's account of encountering other modern individuals during his temporal displacement. He claimed to have seen people wearing contemporary clothing wandering through the historical scenes, apparently as confused and displaced as himself. "I met a woman in a business suit who said she had been trying to find her way back to the parking lot for what felt like hours," Yamamoto recalled. "She was carrying a digital camera and kept trying to take pictures, but the camera wouldn't function properly. We tried to help each other find the way back to our own time, but nothing we did seemed to work." The most chilling aspect of these encounters was the gradual realization that some of the displaced individuals had been wandering in the temporal maze for much longer than others. Yamamoto described meeting people who claimed to have been lost for days, weeks, or even months from their perspective, despite the fact that their disappearances had been noted for much shorter periods in the real world. There was an old man who said he had been a tourist visiting Todai-ji in 1967. Yamamoto reported he had gotten lost on the forest path and had been trying to find his way back ever since. From his perspective, he had been wandering for 15 years, but he looked exactly as he had when he first disappeared, not a day older. Dr. Fujiwara has research suggests that the vanishing path may be what theoretical physicists call a temporal anomaly zone, a location where the normal flow of time becomes disrupted by unknown forces. His measurements detected unusual electromagnetic readings along the path, particularly near the cedar tree, where most disappearances occur. The instrumentation registered field fluctuations unlike anything in the scientific literature. Dr. Fujiwara noted in his report, "Compass needles spin wildly in the affected area. Atomic clocks lose synchronization, and electromagnetic spectrometers detect energy signatures that don't correspond to any known phenomena. Geological surveys of the area revealed several unusual features that might contribute to the temporal disturbances. The path follows a natural ridgeline that sits atop an underground stream system dating back millions of years. The bedrock contains unusually high concentrations of quartz crystal formations, which some researchers theorize might amplify or focus whatever forces create the temporal anomalies. More intriguingly, Archaeological excavations conducted in secret by government researchers discovered evidence of human activity at the site dating back far earlier than the establishment of Todai-ji Temple. Stone tools and pottery fragments suggest that the location may have been considered sacred or significant for thousands of years. Ancient Shinto texts, discovered in a sealed chamber beneath the Great Buddha Hall during renovation work in 1973, contain references to a place where time flows like water and warn against seeking paths that lead to yesterday or tomorrow. These documents suggest that the temporal anomalies were known to pre-Buddhist inhabitants of the area and may have influenced the decision to build the temple at that specific location. Modern encounters with the vanishing path continue to follow the historical pattern, though increased awareness of the phenomenon has reduced the number of accidental disappearances. Temple administrators now post discreet warnings about staying on main paths after dark and have installed subtle barriers to discourage casual exploration of the affected area. However, the path continues to attract deliberate visitors, individuals who have learned about the phenomenon and intentionally seek to experience temporal displacement. These voluntary explorers represent a new category in the temple's classified registry, one that poses additional challenges for administrators trying to balance spiritual inquiry with public safety. Urban explorer Takashi Matsui became one of the most documented voluntary subjects when he began making regular expeditions to the Vanishing Path in 2005. Armed with multiple recording devices and following carefully planned protocols, Matsui attempted to map the temporal anomalies and understand their patterns. "I approached it as a scientific investigation," Matsui explained in online forums where he documented his experiences. "If there really was some kind of time distortion effect, I wanted to study it systematically and gather evidence that could be analyzed by qualified researchers." Over the course of 3 years, Matsui experienced 17 separate displacement events, ranging from a few hours to his longest absence of 8 days. His detailed logs provide unprecedented insight into the subjective experience of temporal displacement and the apparent rules governing the phenomenon. "Each displacement is different," Matsui noted in his documentation. "Sometimes I find myself in what appears to be the past, watching historical events unfold. Other times I seem to be experiencing potential futures, versions of Todai-ji, that exist in timelines where different architectural or cultural decisions were made." Matsui's most significant discovery was the apparent existence of what he termed temporal layers, multiple timeframes existing simultaneously in the same physical space. During longer displacement events, he reported being able to move between different historical periods by focusing his attention on specific time periods. "I learned that the displacement isn't random," Matsui explained. "There seems to be some kind of consciousness or intelligence governing the experience. If I concentrated on wanting to see the temple as it existed during a particular historical period, I would gradually find myself in that time frame." This ability to navigate between temporal layers allowed Matsui to witness several historically significant events, including the original construction of the Great Buddha in the 8th century and the temple's destruction during medieval warfare. His detailed descriptions of these events often contained information that was later verified by historical scholars. However, Matsui's voluntary experiments came to an abrupt end in 2008 when he vanished during what was supposed to be a routine short-term displacement. Unlike his previous experiences, he did not return after his planned duration and has not been seen since. His final message, posted automatically to an online forum through a delayed send email system, suggested that he had encountered something unexpected during his displacement. "Found others here who have been lost much longer than expected. The temporal layers are more complex than I realized. There are people here from many different time periods, all trying to find their way back. Some claim to have been here for centuries from their perspective. Beginning to suspect that not all displacements are accidental or random. Something seems to be collecting people from different eras. will investigate further. The implication that some intelligence might be deliberately orchestrating the disappearances adds a disturbing new dimension to the Vanishing Path mystery. Temple officials have noted an increase in temporal displacement events since Matsui's final disappearance, as if his investigations somehow triggered increased activity in the phenomenon. Recent witnesses report encountering larger groups of displaced individuals during their experiences, suggesting that the temporal anomaly zone may be expanding or intensifying. Some describe seeing what appear to be entire communities of people from different historical periods existing in a kind of temporal refugee camp within the displaced time frames. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a quantum physicist from Tokyo University who has studied the phenomenon since 2015, theorizes that the Vanishing Path may represent a natural intersection of multiple timeline possibilities, what theoretical physics calls a quantum nexus point. If parallel universe theory is correct, Dr. Tanaka explains, then there are infinite variations of reality existing simultaneously in quantum superposition. The Vanishing Path might be a location where these parallel timelines occasionally intersect with our consensus reality, allowing people to slip between different versions of history. This theory could explain why some displaced individuals encounter historical events that don't match conventional historical records, and why others report seeing potential futures that never come to pass. They may be experiencing alternative timelines where different historical decisions led to different outcomes. The phenomenon has attracted increasing attention from government researchers and international scientific organizations, though all official investigations remain classified. Satellite imagery of the area shows persistent electromagnetic anomalies that have been detected from space since monitoring began in the 1970s. Foreign researchers have reported similar temporal anomaly zones at other ancient religious sites around the world, suggesting that the Vanishing Path may be part of a global network of locations where normal space-time becomes unstable. The common factors appear to be sites with long histories of spiritual significance, specific geological conditions, and proximity to underground water systems. Local Buddhist monks who maintain the spiritual aspects of Todai-ji acknowledge the temporal phenomena while interpreting them through traditional religious frameworks. They view the path as a manifestation of Buddhist teachings about the illusory nature of linear time and the interconnectedness of all existence across temporal boundaries. Buddhism teaches that past, present, and future are mental constructs, explains Abbot Kenji Nakamura, who has overseen spiritual activities at Todai-ji for over 20 years. The Vanishing Path may be a place where these constructs break down, allowing people to experience the true nature of time as it exists beyond human perception. The temple continues to maintain protective measures around the path, while acknowledging that completely preventing access would be neither possible nor necessarily desirable. The phenomenon, whatever its ultimate explanation, represents a unique opportunity to study the nature of time and consciousness in ways that conventional science cannot replicate. For those who approach the Vanishing Path with proper preparation and respect for its dangers, the experience can provide profound insights into the nature of reality and humanity's relationship with time. However, temple administrators emphasize that such exploration should never be undertaken lightly or without understanding the very real possibility that return may not be guaranteed. As twilight falls over Todai-ji and shadows lengthen between the ancient trees, the Vanishing Path waits quietly behind the great Buddha Hall. The weathered stone marker stands sentinel at its entrance, its faded Sanskrit characters offering a warning that few can read and fewer still truly understand. For those who choose to walk this path, either by accident or design, the journey may lead far beyond the simple forest trail they set out to explore. They may find themselves walking through centuries of history, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations, or encountering other travelers who began their journey in times long past or yet to come. The path offers no guarantees of safe return, no promise that those who venture into its temporal maze will ever see their own time again. But for some, the opportunity to transcend the normal boundaries of human existence, to experience time as it truly is, rather than as we perceive it to be, makes the risk worthwhile. In the darkness behind the great Buddha, where time flows like water and yesterday mingles with tomorrow, the vanishing path continues, its eternal invitation to step outside the stream of normal existence and discover what lies beyond the boundaries of linear time. In the heart of Nara, just steps away from the bustling streets filled with tourists and vendors selling deer crackers, lies a place of deceptive tranquility. Sarusawa Pond, with its perfectly still waters reflecting the 5-story pagoda of Kofuku-ji Temple, appears to be nothing more than a scenic ornamental lake, a peaceful spot where visitors can rest and contemplate the beauty of Japan's ancient capital. But as darkness falls and the last tour groups depart, Sarusawa Pond reveals its true nature. The placid waters that reflect temple spires and cherry blossoms during the day become something far more, sinister after sunset, serving as a mirror that shows not the world as it is, but as it was, as it might be, or as it should never be. The pond's supernatural reputation centers on the tragic figure of Anim, a court lady from the 8th century, whose story has become inextricably linked with the dark waters that claimed her life. But recent research suggests that Anim may have been only the first in a long line of women drawn to the pond by forces far older and more malevolent than unrequited love. Historical records from the Nara period describe Anim as a woman of extraordinary beauty, who served in the imperial court during the reign of Emperor Shamu. She had caught the attention of Emperor Shamu himself, becoming his favored companion during a period when the capital was establishing itself as the center of Japanese civilization. But imperial favor proved fleeting. When political circumstances required the emperor to focus his attentions elsewhere, Anim found herself abandoned, her position at court precarious, her future uncertain. The shame of this rejection, combined with the genuine despair of lost love, drove her to seek solace in the one place in Nara where she could contemplate her fate in privacy. On a moonless night in 749 Anim walked to the edge of Sarusawa Pond, gazed into its dark waters, and saw reflected there not her own face, but the face of the woman she had been before imperial attention had elevated and then destroyed her simple life. In that moment of recognition and regret, she stepped into the pond and allowed its waters to close over her head. The discovery of her body the following morning sent shockwaves through the imperial court. Emperor Shumu, perhaps driven by genuine remorse or political necessity, ordered that a shrine be built beside the pond to honor Anim's memory and ensure her spirit would find peace. But peace was not what Yun's spirit sought. The first documented supernatural incident at Sarusawa Pond occurred less than a month after Yunmi's death, when another court lady named Sachiko reported seeing a woman's face in the water that was not her own reflection. The face, which Sakiko recognized as Anim, despite the distortions caused by decomposition, appeared to be trying to communicate, its mouth moving silently beneath the surface. She looked at me with such longing. Sachiko wrote in a letter to her sister. It was preserved in the imperial archives. Not the longing of the dead for life, but the longing of the abandoned for companionship. I felt she was asking me to join her, to share in her eternal contemplation of what might have been. Sachiko's letter, discovered during renovations of the Imperial Archive building in 1923, provides the earliest written evidence of what would become known as the calling of Anim, the phenomenon of women seeing the drowned court lady's face reflected in Sarusawa Pond, usually accompanied by an overwhelming compulsion to enter the water. Over the following decades, several more court ladies died in Sarusawa Pond under circumstances that mirror Yunmi's suicide. Each was found to have visited the pond alone at night. Each had been experiencing personal distress or romantic disappointment, and each had been seen staring into the water for extended periods before disappearing beneath the surface. Temple records from Kofuku-ji which assumed responsibility for spiritual activities around the pond after the imperial court moved away from Nara. Document increasingly elaborate purification rituals designed to calm Yuning's restless spirit. But rather than reducing supernatural activity, these ceremonies seemed to intensify it. By the Heian period, the pond had gained a reputation throughout Japan as a place where women could commune with the spirit of tragic love. Pilgrims began arriving from distant provinces, seeking guidance from Yunna's ghost about their own romantic difficulties. What they found was more dangerous than spiritual counsel. Lady Murasaki Shikibu, author of The Tale of Genji and one of Japan's greatest literary figures, wrote about visiting Sarusawa Pond in 1005 during her travels. Her private diary, not discovered until 1889, contains a disturbing account of her encounter with the pond's supernatural phenomena. I approached the water at sunset, hoping to understand the melancholy beauty that drives women to seek death in its depths, Murasaki wrote. What I saw in the reflection was not my own face, but the face of a woman I had never met, yet whom I recognized as intimately as I knew myself. The face Murasaki saw was that of a court lady from an earlier era, dressed in the fashion of 50 years past, with eyes that held the accumulated sorrow of decades. As she watched, transfixed, other faces began to appear in the water. Dozens of women from different time periods, all bearing expressions of profound loss and unfulfilled longing. I realized I was seeing the faces of all the women who had died in this pond, Murasaki continued. Not just their physical features, but their emotional essence, the particular quality of their despair, the specific nature of their abandonment. Each face was a story of love denied, dreams shattered, lives cut short by the cruelty of circumstance. Most disturbing was Murasaki's account of how the reflected faces seemed to recognize her presence and respond to her emotional state. As she contemplated her own romantic disappointments and professional struggles, the faces in the water began to nod in understanding and sympathy. They were offering me membership in their eternal sorority of suffering, Murasaki wrote. I felt the terrible temptation to accept their invitation, to step into the water and join their endless contemplation of what might have been. Only by forcing myself to look away from the pond and recite Buddhist prayers was I able to break free from their influence. Murasaki's account established a pattern that would characterize supernatural encounters at Sarusawa Pond for centuries to come. Women approaching the water would see reflected not their own faces, but the faces of previous victims, each one serving as both warning and invitation to join their number. During the medieval period, as Japan experienced centuries of warfare and social upheaval, the pond attracted increasing numbers of women seeking escape from impossible circumstances. Wives of defeated samurai, daughters facing arranged marriages to cruel men, and women whose families had been destroyed by political conflict found their way to Sarusawa Pond's dark waters. Buddhist monks from nearby temples began maintaining constant vigils around the pond, hoping to intervene before distraught women could carry out their fatal intentions. But their presence seemed to have little effect on the supernatural phenomena, and in some cases appeared to make the situation worse. Brother Jishin, a monk who maintained the evening watch from 1467 to 1492, documented over 300 instances of women experiencing supernatural visions while gazing into the pond. His detailed records, preserved in the Kofupi archives, provide unprecedented insight into the mechanics of the pond's malevolent influence. The spirits work systematically, Jishin wrote in his final report before requesting transfer to a different assignment. They begin by showing the living woman faces of the dead who experienced similar sorrows. This creates a sense of kinship and understanding that breaks down the natural human instinct for self-preservation. According to Jishin's observations, the supernatural influence progressed through distinct stages. First, the woman would see faces of the dead that reflected her own emotional state. Then, the reflected faces would begin to communicate, sharing stories of their own suffering and eventual release through death. In the final stage, the spirits show visions of what death in the pond would bring, Jishin noted. Not the reality of drowning and decomposition, but a fantasy of eternal peace and reunion with lost loves. These visions are so compelling, so perfectly tailored to each woman's deepest desires, that few had the strength to resist. Jishin's records indicate that he successfully prevented 47 women from entering the pond during his 25 years of service, but acknowledged that many others visited the pond when he was not on duty or arrived during the early morning hours when his vigil ended. The monk's most detailed account concerns a young woman named Yukiko who came to the pond in 1489 after her husband was killed in battle. Jishin watched as she knelt by the water's edge and began the familiar process of supernatural communication with the drowned spirits. I could see the progression of her experience reflected in her posture and expressions, Jishin wrote. At first she seemed merely sad, contemplating her loss in the quiet beauty of the moonlit pond. Then her attention became focused, as if she was listening to voices only she could hear. As Jishin watched, Yukiko began responding to the unseen spirits, nodding in agreement and occasionally speaking aloud. She described seeing her husband's face among the reflections, beckoning her to join him in death. The drowned women were apparently using her grief as a tool to convince her that suicide would bring reunion rather than separation. I approached carefully, not wanting to startle her and precipitate the very action I hoped to prevent, Jishin continued. When I spoke her name, she turned to me with eyes that were no longer entirely her own. Something else was looking out through them, something that had been in the pond for a very long time. The entity speaking through Yukiko identified itself as Anim, the original victim whose death had begun the pond's supernatural activity. But Jishin noted that the personality seemed far more complex and malevolent than historical accounts of the court lady would suggest. This was not the gentle, melancholy spirit of a woman driven to suicide by love, Jishin observed. This was something that had grown and changed during centuries beneath the water, fed by the despair of subsequent victims and shaped by their collective anguish into something far removed from its original human nature. The entity claiming to be Anim spoke to Jishin about the nature of suffering and the peace that could be found in surrendering to despair. Its arguments were sophisticated and compelling, addressing not just Yukiko's immediate grief, but fundamental questions about the meaning of existence and the value of continuing to live in a world filled with loss and disappointment. It spoke with the accumulated wisdom of centuries, Jishin noted, using insights gleaned from hundreds of women who had shared their deepest fears and desires with the pond before succumbing to its influence. This was not a simple ghost, but a composite entity that had grown more powerful and persuasive with each new victim. Only through intensive Buddhist chanting and the physical intervention of grabbing Yukiko's arms was Jishin able to break the supernatural connection and lead her away from the pond. Even then, she struggled to return to the water, claiming that she could hear her husband calling her name from beneath the surface. She never fully recovered from the experience, Jishin noted in a follow-up entry written 6 months later. Though she did not return to the pond, she remained obsessed with the visions she had seen there. She spoke constantly of the peace she had glimpsed in death and the companionship she had been offered by the drowned spirits. Yukiko Isis illustrates a disturbing aspect of the pond's supernatural influence that became more apparent during the Edo period. Even women who were prevented from drowning themselves often remained psychologically connected to the entities in the water, experiencing ongoing visions and compulsions that sometimes lasted for years. Dr. Kenji Yamashita, a psychiatrist who studied the pond's effects during the 1950s, identified what he termed Sarusawa syndrome, a specific form of depression and suicidal ideation that affected women who had experienced supernatural encounters at the pond but survived the initial incident. The syndrome manifests as persistent auditory and visual hallucinations involving water imagery. Dr. Yamashita wrote in his 1958 research paper, patients report hearing their names called by voices that seem to emanate from any standing water they encounter. Bathtubs, rain puddles, even drinking glasses. Dr. Yamashita's research, based on interviews with 37 women who had survived encounters with the pond's supernatural phenomena, revealed that the psychological effects could persist for decades. Some patients continued to experience weekly or even daily supernatural contacts throughout their lives. The entity or entities in the pond seem to maintain active psychic connections with those who have once been touched by their influence, Dr. Yamashita observed. This suggests a level of supernatural intelligence and persistence that goes far beyond simple haunting phenomena. Modern encounters with Sarusawa Pond supernatural forces have been complicated by the area's development as a tourist destination. The pond is now surrounded by walking paths, decorative lighting, and informational plaques that describe its historical significance while carefully avoiding mention of its supernatural reputation. However, these modern amenities have done nothing to reduce the supernatural activity. If anything, the increased foot traffic has provided the entities in the pond with more potential victims to influence. Tourist guide Akiko Matsumoto, who has led groups around Sarusawa Pond for over 15 years, has developed an unofficial protocol for dealing with visitors who begin showing signs of supernatural influence during evening tours. You learn to recognize the warning signs, Matsumoto explains in an interview with paranormal researchers. Women will become fixated on their reflection in the water, stop responding to questions from their companions, and begin having what appear to be one-sided conversations with invisible entities. Matsumoto's most disturbing experience occurred in 2018 when a middle-aged tourist from Tokyo began exhibiting classic symptoms of supernatural influence during a sunset photography tour. The woman, identified only as Mrs. Tanaka, had been taking pictures of the pond's reflection when she suddenly became motionless, staring into the water with complete absorption. At first, I thought she was just concentrating on getting the perfect shot, Matsumoto recalls. But when I approached to move the group along, I could see that she wasn't looking at the camera's viewfinder anymore. She was staring directly into the water, and her lips were moving as if she was having a conversation. When Matsumoto tried to get Mrs. Tanaka's attention, the woman began describing what she was seeing in the pond's reflection. Instead of the evening sky and temple pagoda, she reported seeing faces of women from different historical periods, all of whom seemed to be trying to communicate with her. She started naming them, Matsumoto continues. Not names she could have known from history books, but personal names like Sister Keiko says her husband never loved her, and Lady Yoshino regrets marrying for duty instead of love. She was having detailed conversations with what appeared to be dozens of individual spirits. The situation escalated when Mrs. Tanaka began removing her shoes and stepping toward the water's edge. Other tourists in the group tried to restrain her, but she displayed unusual strength and determination, insisting that she needed to join the Sisterhood of Understanding in the pond. She wasn't hysterical or obviously disturbed, Matsumoto notes. She spoke calmly and rationally about her decision to enter the water, explaining that she had finally found people who understood her disappointments and could offer her eternal companionship. It was more frightening than if she had been screaming or violent. Only the intervention of temple security guards, who were trained to recognize and respond to such incidents, prevented Mrs. Tanaka from entering the pond. She was taken to a local hospital for psychiatric evaluation and eventually released to her family's care. But follow-up inquiries revealed that she continued to experience supernatural contacts related to the pond for months afterward. She kept calling the temple, asking about the women she had met in the water, Matsumoto reveals. She wanted to know their full names and histories, as if they had been real people she had befriended rather than supernatural entities trying to lure her to her death. Contemporary paranormal investigators have attempted to study Sarusawa Pond using modern technology, but their efforts have been hampered by the same electromagnetic interference that affects equipment at other supernatural sites throughout Japan. Cameras malfunction. Recording devices capture only static, and electromagnetic field detectors provide inconsistent readings. However, some researchers have reported success using more traditional investigative methods. Psychic investigators who claim sensitivity to supernatural phenomena have provided detailed descriptions of the pond as spiritual inhabitants that align closely with historical accounts. Medium Hiroko Sasaki, who conducted seances at the pond in 2015, reported making contact with what she believed to be the original unnamed spirit, though she noted that the entity had been fundamentally changed by centuries of interaction with subsequent victims. The being that calls itself Anim is no longer primarily human, Sasaki reported in her published account. It has become something like a queen bee in a hive of drowned spirits, organizing and directing their collective influence on the living world. According to Sasaki's communications, the pond serves as a focal point for a complex supernatural ecosystem, involving not just the drowned women, but also older spiritual entities that predate human settlement in the area. These older spirits apparently use the emotional energy generated by human suffering to maintain their existence in the physical world. The human spirits are both victims and tools, Sasaki explained. They genuinely experience the emotions and desires they display to potential victims, but they are also being manipulated by older entities that feed on despair and death. This interpretation suggests that the supernatural phenomena at Sarusawa Pond represent something far more complex than simple ghost activity. The site may be functioning as a kind of spiritual trap, using human emotions and desires as bait to capture victims whose life force then feeds some form of parasitic, supernatural intelligence. Recent developments have added new dimensions to the pond's supernatural activity. Climate change has affected water levels and temperature patterns, leading to changes in the timing and intensity of supernatural manifestations. Local temple officials report that the traditional seasonal patterns of activity have become less predictable, with intense supernatural events now occurring at unexpected times. More concerning are reports that the pond's influence is beginning to extend beyond its immediate vicinity. Women throughout Nara have reported experiencing supernatural visions while looking into other bodies of water, bathroom mirrors, puddles, even cups of tea that seem to be connected to the entities in Sarusawa Pond. Environmental scientist Dr. Yuki Nakamura, who has studied the pond's ecosystem since 2010, has documented unusual changes in the water's chemical composition that correlate with reported supernatural activity. During periods of high paranormal activity, the water shows increased levels of minerals that typically only occur in underground springs. Despite the pond's surface water source, there appears to be some kind of underground connection that becomes active during supernatural events. Dr. Nakamura theorizes the water chemistry changes suggest that the pond is somehow drawing from deeper aquifers during these periods, possibly explaining how the supernatural entities maintain their connection to the physical world. The chemical changes are accompanied by temperature variations that create unusual mist formations above the pond's surface. These mists often take on shapes that witnesses interpret as human figures, lending visual credibility to claims of spiritual manifestations. As night falls over modern Nara and the tourist crowds disperse, Sarusawa Pond remains as dangerous as it was over 1,000 years ago when Anin first walked into its dark waters. The gentle lapping of water against the stone embankment masks the whispered conversations between the living and the dead that continue throughout the night. The pond's surface perfectly still and the windless darkness reflects not just the lights of the surrounding city, but also the faces of countless women who have found in its depths not the peace they sought, but an eternal existence as recruiters for an ever-growing sisterhood of the lost. For women who approach the water's edge carrying their own burdens of disappointment and despair, the pond offers understanding, companionship, and the promise of release from the struggles of mortal existence. But the price of admission to this supernatural community is a currency that, once paid, can never be refunded. In the darkness of Sarusawa Pond, Anin, and her ever-growing collection of sister spirits, wait patiently for the next woman who will gaze into the water seeking solace, and instead find an invitation to join their eternal contemplation of lost and dreams abandoned. The pond remembers every face that has looked into its depths, every tear that has fallen into its waters, every hope that has been extinguished beneath its surface. And in its perfect memory, it preserves not just the physical features of the drowned, but their emotional essence, their capacity for influencing the living through the universal language of shared suffering. As the moon rises over the ancient capital, and its light dances on the pond's still surface, the water begins once again its nightly transformation from peaceful ornamental lake to supernatural mirror, ready to show any who dare to look not their own reflection, but the accumulated sorrow of 13 centuries of women who chose death over the continuation of unbearable life. Whispering lanterns that know your name, a path that bends time, and spirits watching silently through the fog of ancient forests. Nara is more than Japan's first capital. It's a realm suspended between the living and something far older. Here, shrines are not just monuments, they are warnings. We came in search of beauty and uncovered a city haunted by its own history. But the mysteries don't end here. In every forgotten temple, every silent street, the unknown is waiting. Where should Mystery Frontier travel next? What secrets lie buried in your city, your country, your legends? Leave a comment. Tell us what to uncover. And subscribe to Mystery Frontier, because the world hides stories the daylight cannot reveal. And we're just getting started.